Welcome back, guys. If you haven't been here before, my name is Elias Addy. I am currently a principal cloud consultant and director at a managed services provider. I have been in IT for quite some time, maybe about 12 years or so. I started at a service desk role, entry-level role, and I've worked myself way into a principal cloud consultant role and also as a director at a managed service provider. That's a bit of a background about me for people that haven't been here before. Today, what I'm going to cover specifically is around what people or organizations hate about IT managed services providers. So to give you a bit of a background, I've been in the field for about 12 years, as I mentioned. I think it's 10 or 12. I keep saying 10 or 12. Maybe one day I'll actually go back and find out, so I can just say 10 or 12. But I've been in the industry for some time now, and what I have realized is there is a lot of negative sort of, what I have noticed is that there is a lot of negative feelings towards a lot of managed services providers. Now, one thing I have learned is that every industry has negative feelings or negative connotations surrounding it, depending on who you're talking to. I feel like IT suffers from this a lot, specifically managed services providers, even internal, even when you're working internal at a company and you're the sole IT support engineer, there's always customers and people that make you feel like everything is your fault. And look, being in the field, being on both ends, I've been a provider and I've been internal and I've even been a customer. Sometimes things happen that we just can't avoid. Sometimes IT guys are not to blame. A lot of the time, they're not to blame. Usually, it's other concerns, budget constraints, or issues with technologies, or issues with vendors. A lot of the time, it's just a compounding effect, really. So, one day I was sitting in our office one day, and I thought to myself, what do people hate about IT? What do businesses dislike about dealing with IT providers? And I thought of a bit of a list, and I wrote that list on a whiteboard in our office. I think that list that I came up with may not be definitive, but I think it's a good list, and I think it may highlight a lot of the reasons people have negative feelings towards IT providers or IT support teams, internal or IT vendors. And some of these I'm going to go through are from personal experience, and some of these are ones that people have suggested to me. So the way I feel about this is that if you can come up with a list of all the things that so let's take it personal. So if I can come up with a list of all the things that people hate about me, or all the things that people dislike about dealing with me, to be very specific, I would then make a list, and from that list I would improve. And I would continue to make sure that I do things that help me mitigate those things that people dislike about me. So we're doing the same for the business. So what we did was we put together a list of things, and what we do generally day to day is we try and actively be aware of what those things are. So for example, if you're in a conversation with a client or a customer or a vendor, I always try and keep it in my mind what people dislike about dealing with IT providers, and I try and do the opposite. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, but it's good to just be aware. So what are some of these things? Let's start with jargon. Jargon in IT is probably one of the worst things that people like hearing. So when you sit there and you talk in jargon or acronyms, or you're using technical language, people don't like that. Generally, when an engineer or when someone technical is talking to, let's say, a director or a CIO or a IT manager or something like that, both parties aren't always on the same technical level. So I might be talking to someone about a Windows server, and I might use terminology like DHCP, but you really got to understand your audience. You got to know who you're talking to. I'm talking to the CIO of the company. The chances of him knowing what DHCP is, that's probably a bad example. Maybe he or she will know what DHCP is, but we have to assume that they don't. So the use of jargon in day-to-day talking or interaction with people, I think that needs to be improved. When we're writing in documentation, it depends. You need to understand your audience. So whenever we write a piece of documentation, we always have a target audience in mind. So my target audience will always be highlighted at the start of a document. That makes it easier for me to go back to the customer and know who that document should go to. I don't want to send a low level design document to a CIO who's going to go through it and it's not in his interest to understand everything, or he or she, sorry. So that person may then get annoyed, or they may feel like we've wasted their time by making them read something like that. So know your audience and use the jargon appropriately, and use the least amount of jargon as possible. That's what I've been trying to do. That's what we've been trying to push through our business as well. After sales support is another one. So after sales support is after you've done the deal, after your sales guy has gone and got a signature on the dotted line, he's sold a product, he's sold a environment, he's sold a managed services customer. The after sales support in IT seems to be one of those things that is very hit and miss. Sometimes you get a salesperson that's very driven and drives the sale the whole way through. So it's a 3-year engagement. They will be around for the whole 3 years. They'll be checking up on things. They'll be following up the engineers. They'll be following up all the teams involved. They'll be providing updates to the customers. Unfortunately, this doesn't always happen. The sales guys or girls, a lot of the time this isn't a dig at sales people, but sometimes what happens is they move on to the next gig. They make the sale, they move on to the next gig. They make the sale, they move on to the next gig. Unfortunately, that's not good for the customer, and the customers generally don't appreciate that. They like dealing with the same people. So the person that sold them the product or the service, it's nice if they stick around, or at least if they hand over that relationship, not just the product, hand over the relationship to someone who will continue that relationship with the customer, not just move on to the next gig. In IT world, there is such thing as a service delivery manager, and a lot of the time organizations engage these people after the sale has been complete. So once we've got down to completing the sale, then we can go and so all in all, what I'm trying to say is after sales support is something that we all need to actively work on and actively improve on. Following up with customers is key. We learn that from all industries, things like customer surveys and things like customer surveys. I've been teaching that for years. I think that's crucial in IT, and I think that's something that's missed. When we're talking managed services, yeah, plenty of customer surveys go out, plenty of customer surveys get put into graphs and turned into real data. But when we're talking sales, maybe not so much. So when we're talking professional services, so selling hardware or infrastructure, I think we lack a bit in the customer survey and customer survey to understand the customer's experience. Another point is inflexibility. So what I mean by that is the attitude that a lot of managed services provide. Another point that I have is inflexibility. So not being able to move on outcomes. So this is a bit of a gray area, I think. The reason it's a bit of a gray area is, from my experience, we go out to customers and we gather requirements and we build solutions, and then we build project services based on outcomes. So what generally happens in those scenarios a lot of the time is that scopes change in flight. This is you can sort of blame both parties on this. One side is the professional services company who goes in and gathers the requirements but maybe misses something. But is it their fault, or is it the customer's fault for not telling them about the requirements? You can sort of see both. So maybe the customer didn't give them the requirements, but maybe the professional service provider didn't ask for those requirements. So being inflexible is what is basically customer coming back to you and saying something like, we need to add this to the project, and you going, nope, the project is what it is and the scope cannot be changed. That is very common. I think that we need to, as an industry, think of better ways to put together solutions and understand requirements so that we get less scope variation in projects. And I think it all comes down to planning, and both parties need to take a bit of responsibility. So the customer needs to take responsibility for their own requirements, but the professional services provider needs to also take some responsibility in gathering those requirements properly and trying their best not to miss anything. This one is a bit hard, but we sort of just need to keep it in mind again, and sort of just always have it sort of in the back of your mind, thinking about how you're going to provide the best solution, but also how you're going to try and create the least amount of scope creep in your project. Over-promising. This is another very crucial one in IT. I see over-promising all the time. Time and time again, we hear vendors or customers reporting to us about other managed service providers going in and basically just promising the world but not delivering it. This seems to be very rampant in IT. I think it's mainly because a vendor can come to a managed services provider and really sell the dream of a product that is great and meets all the requirements and really meets everything that the customer wants and more. On the other hand, the people that sell the product every day are more inclined to be able to deploy it very easily and to deploy it in such a manner that it's working 100% all the time. When you have a managed service provider rolling out those services as well, there's a lot of moving parts that doesn't happen in a POC environment that the vendor is deploying. So a professional service provider or a managed service provider that comes in and then tries to deploy that product sometimes doesn't achieve the same outcome that was promised by the vendor. Unfortunately, this is going to happen. And what we need to do is always involve skilled people in the deployment of these products. So if you're going to deploy a Nutanix solution, you make sure that you use someone that has great Nutanix experience. Managed services providers or professional service providers can be guilty of using cheaper resources to deploy something that really requires someone with a bit more expertise and is a bit more expensive. We need to work on that as an industry as well. That one is a bit tough because I understand both sides of that one. You always want to utilize every piece of the product that you've bought as the customer, but as a managed service provider, we see things differently. Sometimes we come in and we look at what's been promised by the vendor after the fact, and sometimes we can't meet those solutions because the customer's environment is different. So I think the easiest way to not overpromise is to set expectations early. And the way you set expectations early is you make yourself and your customer aware of those expectations. And if there's something that you think may or may not work, then you need to call it out early. Sales fluff. So this is one that's very common. A lot of the time, I've worked in multiple managed service providers, and when we respond to a IT tender or a project tender, when I was working in a larger corporations, multiple corporations, no one in specific, we would put like 10 or maybe 5 or 10 pages at the start of the document that is a spiel about maybe us, the managed service provider, and even the customer who the tender is for. It'd be like 5 or 10 pages of just a background of the company and a background of what they've been doing in the past 10 years, for example. Sometimes customers like that, but I can tell you now that most of the time they don't. A document should be just an outline of what you're proposing with costs associated with what you're proposing, and it should be very clear and concise with an outcome stated nice and clearly. No need for all the extra things like, overviews of the company, of each other's company, each party's company. I think it's just a bit of a nice way to fill the document, really, when it might be a bit unnecessary. Can't count how many times I've seen customers look at a document like a statement of work or something. There's 10 pages of sales and they just scroll right past it and go down to the price. They'll go down to the price and then they'll go back up to the outcomes and then they'll look at the other bits and pieces in there, but no one ever reads the overviews. It's just a waste of time and effort, to be honest. And usually, to be fair, companies are usually just going onto the party's website, copying the about page and sticking it in there. I've seen it all. So I think that is probably enough for today. I think there's plenty more things, but those are the things I just thought of quickly and put up on the whiteboard. And those are things we actively try and work on and improve on at Quantec. If you can think of anything else, I think it'd be a great idea for you to drop it in the comments below and let me know what you think and let me know what you've experienced. And if you're listening on a podcast, feel free to shoot through an email or visit our website or visit YouTube and have a watch and leave some comments. Otherwise, if you like what you hear and you want to hear more, hit like and subscribe. It really motivates me to keep making more. See you next time.